Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Stark Reflections podcast. I was delighted to hear from so many people who enjoyed the first episode, and in particular, those who appreciated the frankness by which I shared some of my own goals, my missed goals, and even the modest income that I revealed I had earned on certain projects. It's important for me that writers understand they aren't alone on their journeys, and that comparing ourselves to only the most successful in the industry is not going to help. However, comparing ourselves with our own selves in the past can be a positive thing. That's one of the reasons why I'm delighted to be interviewing Joanna Penn and talking about her new co-authored book, The Healthy Writer. Joanna wrote this book with Dr. Euan Lawson, and in our chat, Joe and I talk not only about the importance of physical and mental well-being for writers, but also what has changed since she started in blogging and podcasting 10 years ago. Important strategies for blocking out her time in order to achieve a work-life balance, as well as things that both surprised her, as well as what she is most looking forward to related to publishing. Now, I've known Joanna for several years and consider her not only an authoritative and trustworthy voice, but also a dear friend. Many writers I have met over the years have actually indicated that they recognize my voice from either being a guest on one of Joanna's The Creative Penn Podcast episodes, or even from the short Kobo Writing Life ads that play near the beginning of some of her episodes. That has always been a special treat. But speaking of those ads, one of the things I've always admired about Joanna is that she only accepts sponsorship from companies that she herself trusts and would endorse personally. So following along in that same suit, I'm delighted to let you know that I have accepted a sponsorship from Findaway Voices. Like Joanna, I will only accept sponsorships from the places that I myself believe in, use, and have some experience with. I want to make sure I'm sharing things with writers that I personally value. This can assure you of my own integrity and authenticity. Now, Findaway Voices is a great company, and I've had the pleasure of working with them both as a retailer when I was at Kobo, but also as an author. Prior to the sponsorship agreement, I had scheduled Kelly Lytle, head of Findaway Voices, to come and share some insights for authors interested in audiobooks. So we'll be chatting about that in more detail in a future episode. But in a nutshell, Findaway Voices is a platform that allows authors a chance to work collaboratively with a narrator within not only a flexible but very reasonable budget, but to have that audiobook produced and distributed to audio platforms in 170 countries around the world, and with the additional ability to completely control the price. Now, because I have a draft to digital account for ebook publishing to Nook, iBooks, and a bunch of other retailers, all I needed to do to get started on Findaway Voices was to click a button within Draft to Digital to transfer all of my ebooks metadata over to Findaway Voices. I have produced 2 books with them so far, which I did in 2017, and I am quite pleased with my narrators. Eric Brian Moore, who narrates Active Reader and Other Cautionary Tales from the Book World, which is a short story collection, and Nick Barda, who narrates Collateral Damage, a short story in the Sin Eater universe where the novel I, Death takes place. Great experience. I have other projects already in the works with Findaway Voices, and I'm looking forward to working with both of these wonderful narrators again on future planned projects, which I'm going to be sharing with you as this podcast goes forward. To learn more about Findaway Voices, go to starkreflections.ca/findaway. But that's enough of an introduction. If you have questions you would like to ask or comments, please email me at mark@markleslie.ca or reach out to me on Twitter via @markleslie. So, without further ado, let's get on with the conversation with Joanna Penn. Hey, Joanna. Welcome to the Stark Reflections podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me, Mark. It's great to be here.
It is always wonderful to chat with you. And as a huge fan of you, your work, and the Creative Penn, I'm so excited about your latest book, the book that you've published with Dr. Euan Lawson. Could you tell our listeners about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's called The Healthy Writer. And I guess it is about physical and mental health. And it's so interesting because as nonfiction authors, and you write nonfiction, well, mine is slightly more self-help directed than yours, but it's kind of like you write the book that you need to learn.
Okay.
And I've been blessed to be very successful as a writer, but I confess to being a workaholic, and I found myself sort of in 2016. Really, we're recording this in 2018, beginning of 2018, and I found myself like overweight, not enough energy, burning out, getting headaches again. And then I look back over my sort of life as an office worker, and let's face it, writers are office workers, and back pain, digestive issues, I used to get migraine, mental health issues, and then I started to realize that this was really common in the author community. So I started talking about this on my podcast, and then spoke at an event, and Dr. Euan Lawson, who's a British medical doctor, approached me and said, we could co-write a book. So the book is it's very interesting because both of our voices are in there, and some chapters are from Dr. Euan, and it's very much a sort of medical point of view, and then other chapters are very personal. So I have a letter to sugar chapter, which is a sort of why I wanted desperately to give up sugar, which I was addicted to, and how that was affecting my mental health as well as my body weight and all of that type of thing, as well as things like digestive issues, that just so many things that people suffer, depression, loneliness. It's surprising how many writers struggle with loneliness, so many people, I guess. So the book, I feel, is very important at this time in the writer's history, because we are, as you know, we're in this sort of era where, as a creator, you can do whatever you want. Yeah. You really can. The sky's the limit. But the danger then is that you just work, and you forget the reason why, and you forget to look after yourself. So, walking is a really big thing for me. I've done 2 double ultra marathons in the last couple of years, and, just really changing things up so physical and mental health are a much more important part of my life. And the aim is that the book will help other people go through that too.
Well, that is awesome. It is the #1 read for 2018 for me. I'm looking forward to it. I'm also going to direct people to a recent podcast interview where you and Dr. Lawson talked a little bit about the book. So the question I have to ask you based on that, given your stature in the industry, I can imagine a lot of people have approached you and said, let's co-author a book. How do you decide? So when you heard from you, and how did you decide, oh yes, this is one for me to work on?
Well, it's interesting you say that. I mean, the only other person has been J. Thorne, who I also have co-written 2 novels with, Risen Gods and American Demon Hunters, Sacrifice. And those... I think co-writing is such an interesting thing. Oh, I say that. I also co-write with my mum now, a contemporary sweet romance under the pen name Penny Appleton. So I actually have now co-written with quite a few people. Now, I think what happened with Euan was he came to me with the idea because I'd been talking about it. So I'm sure I've had emails that pitched completely random things, but this tied into what I wanted to do myself. I've also been collecting blog posts and articles on health-related topics for years, and in terms of the IBS, the digestive system chapter, I actually had started a book on that because it changed me and my husband's life so much to find the answer to IBS for us. So I think when he came to me, I was like, this is a book I want to write, and it challenged me. I was totally unplanned for my year. I just jumped into it. But then what I did is I said, all right, mate, that sounds great. How about you give me a sample chapter? And so I tested it. I tested him in that way. He wrote the chapter and I said, yeah, that sounds like you're a doctor and that's a medical journal. So how about we go again? And he did another version. So he really, he learned a lot over the year, because if you co-write with someone who's not, if the book audience is not a medical audience, you can't use medical words and, like write like a journal. So it was a really interesting process. But my tip for people who want to co-write is you've both got to want to do it. It's got to be something you want to both do, and you've got to both bring an equal value to the relationship. So each of my co-written projects have been different, but they all have, a balanced relationship, which is why all my co-written books are 50-50 split in terms of royalties.
Okay, and that sounds like the perfect kind of balance in order for you to have a healthy career as a writer as well.
Yes, I mean, it's interesting. Obviously, some people are really going hard on this, sort of co-writing lots and lots of books. It's not something this year, I'm not, in 2018, I'm doing 3 more with my mum. But in that example, I play more of an editorial part, a story structure, editorial and publishing and marketing partnership. But for my nonfiction, for JF Penn, I have no plans to co-write. So I think there has to be a balance, because when you co-write, you have to share so much, and in terms of the creative process, and you have to sort of relax a bit. But I definitely intend to co-write again. I don't have any immediate plans.
It's funny you say you have to relax a bit. I'm co-writing a book with Shayna from Kobo.
Yes.
And she's really structured and organized, and I'm completely the opposite. So I'm the relaxed one, and I'm the one freaking her out right now, because I tend to scramble it all together at the last minute. So I have to recognize, for her own health, I should provide a little bit more information ahead of time rather than wait till the last minute. And that's a thing that I'm learning, how to make sure that your co-author feels confident.
Yes, exactly. And as independent authors, this can be an even bigger problem, because, traditionally published authors, of which you are as well, are kind of used to these deadlines. But when you're making your own deadlines, it can be quite hard. And especially with Euan and I, we wanted the book out for 1st of January for their self-help season.
But you nailed it too.
We did nail it. We did. But it was an interesting process and some pretty, tight deadlines. But yes, I think this process of learning as writers, again, this is a career we do until we die, hopefully. So we have to keep learning. We have to keep changing and learning. Otherwise, it gets really boring.
Well, you've never let it get boring, because you're doing like sort of 3 things now. You're doing the Penny Appleton with your mom, but you've also had the Joanna Penn brand for nonfiction, where you're trusted by the author community. But then you're also the dark thriller fiction author, JF Penn. And I'm curious, that you're now balancing 3 different personas. How do you do that?
I went for a walk before this to clear my mind, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, what the hell? For all the listeners, don't do this. Don't have 3 pen names. It's ridiculous. But I think the Penny brand is not very active. So we're not doing, my mum, it's more about self-expression, and it's practical because it's romance, so it does sell on its own really, but very little, a couple of $100 a month really. And I'm not doing that as a very active brand until we've built up a backlist. So I've said to her, once we get to 10 books, then hell yeah, we'll put some marketing clout behind it. But with JF Penn is very much my introvert shadow side. So at the moment, I get up, in the first thing I do when I get up is JF Penn. So I'm at the cafe at 7, and kind of 7 till 9:30, 10ish, I write JF Penn. So that is either, at the moment I'm doing a screenplay adaptation for Map of Shadows, which is my latest dark fantasy novel, and then I'll be working on the next arcane thriller. So I've got that JF Penn kind of shadow side, and then I go and do some exercise, some yoga or walk or something, and then I come back. Joanna Penn is designed for the community. So JF Penn, I feel, is, you know how this is. Writing fiction is almost a selfish pursuit, because you're like, oh, I really love this, I'm going to write this. and for Joanna Penn, it's more like, what will help my community? Like, what am I interested in, but also what will help my community? So the next Joanna Penn book will be how to write a novel, which people have been asking me for ages. And I have a draft, and I just need to get through that. And so I balance it mainly by hyper scheduling my time, which might sound, dry in many ways, but I was actually just before this going through scheduling more blocks of time off. And so this is the big deal. So I schedule my JF, yes, off, as in, and not off entirely because I love what I do, but off in terms of meetings like this. Now, you and I have been friends for years, and this is not like stressful, but it's still time away from creating my own work, or going deep into a topic. That Deep Work by Cal Newport, I really recommend that book to everyone. It's a great book, and it's more about scheduling blocks of time where you can immerse yourself and achieve. And so what I'm trying to do is really schedule, like, meetings like this will go in on one particular day a week, and my JF Penn time goes in, and my exercise time, and really just trying to make sure I don't get so burned out. Like, for the first time since 2006, I've now said weekends, no computer. Like, I haven't had a whole weekend since, like, I've gone traveling and stuff, but in terms of a regular weekend, I haven't been doing that. So now I've been doing the podcast on Saturday mornings for a long time. Okay. So I've now moved the podcast to Fridays, so I can do another yoga class on Saturday. So these are things I'm trying to do for my longevity. But what I would say to people listening, if you're earlier in the process, so I started in 2006 writing, and the website 2008. So I've been doing this a while, and now I feel like in order to take the next steps, I need to start allowing more space to think and create instead of doing email.
Fair enough. Now, so I have to ask, because this is a Monday in early January.
Yes.
So Saturday, Sunday, the last 2 days, did you actually just enjoy?
Well, when I say off, Saturday morning, I did a yoga class. Saturday afternoon, I did. I've been, when you buy all these courses and then you never have time to do them.
Yes.
I actually now have time on a Saturday afternoon to do courses that I'm interested in. So I'm doing the screenwriting ones on Masterclass, which are brilliant. Okay. I'm using Saturday afternoon for learning. And then Sunday, we basically walked a half marathon just for fun. Fantastic.
Just for fun, because that's what you do now.
It is. And then and then reading. So this is the other challenge for people. When is your reading time? As authors, we need to read. Also with screenwriting, like, when do we watch movies? When do we watch TV in an active way as opposed to a more passive way? So this is why scheduling, I think, is the secret. Like, people are like, oh, how do you do so much? Or how do you write a novel? Well, the only secret, I think, is scheduling time. And then when you've scheduled that time, turn up and actually do the writing, or do the marketing, or build the website, or do the podcast, or whatever. Like, schedule the time, do the task, and you're one step closer. And it's the people who just wait for tomorrow and never make the time. My biggest question is, well, what's important to you? What do you value? And that's what you have to schedule in. Like you and Liz, or you and your son, me and my husband, yesterday, Sundays, we walk and spend the whole day talking to each other. That might be a nightmare for some people, but that's what we enjoy. And then we get to talk, and that's our marriage time. So awesome. I think it's just that balance that if you don't actively control it, life just gets out of hand.
Okay, that's cool. Now, I love the way that you incorporate elements from your life into your writing in different ways. You do a lot of traveling, and obviously you talk to a lot of people through podcasting. How has that work, which you make fun, of course, how has that sort of helped you on your journey in both, nonfiction and in fiction?
Well, I think, first of all, as and, many of us are introverts. So doing live events can be very tiring, but they have been, very rewarding. So you and I connected online a long time ago, and then we met in person. We have met a number of times at author events, and we kind of renew our friendship in person over a drink or something. And that development of a relationship, I think you can do this type of thing online, but if you then meet people in person, it can lead to longer relationships and, you know, longer friendships over time. So one of my best friends now, Orna Ross, I met her on Twitter sort of when I lived in Australia and she was in England, and I just had no friends. I had no friends who were authors. So I absolutely rate Twitter, you know, as a making friends place. That may have been where we met originally. I can't remember. But you know, I met Orna online, and then when I went to London, I met her for a coffee, and you know, now we've done lots of business together like you and I have, and that's kind of how it works. So I think I absolutely highly rate going to author events and meeting people in person. The other thing is we can come across in certain ways online that perhaps we didn't intend.
Right.
It's quite difficult. You feel in a way like people who listen to my podcast and who, you know, now listen to yours, they feel like they know you in a way. Mm-hmm. But until they kind of meet you at an event, that, you know, that just takes it deeper. So I think that's very important for my fiction. Well, so I think personal connections are very important, and that authors should go to events if they can. And if they're hyper introvert, then go on the Twitter hashtag beforehand, you know, find a group of people, like join a group like the Alliance of Independent Authors, go to the meetups. And also you need community, like you need people who understand what it's like to be a writer. Because right. it, you know, most of your normal friends won't, and your spouse won't, and you know, people just don't understand. And then for fiction, I mean, we last met up in Oregon, and before that, so I was speaking there, as were you, and that was a professional conference. But before that, because I had to travel from the UK all the way to the West Coast, which is a hell of a trip, yeah. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to put on a couple of extra days in San Francisco, where I'd never been, in order to research a novel. So what I tend to do with my fiction is try and add on trips or things that I can find in story. So again, like you and I both like skulls and bones and things. So if I get to a place for anything professional and there's a museum, I will always go, or an art gallery, or, you know, somebody asked me to speak in Philadelphia, and I was like, I don't really want to go to Philadelphia. And then they have the Mutter Museum, which is one of the coolest forensic pathology museums in the world, and I'm seriously now considering speaking in Philadelphia just so I can go to that museum. Which I know will feed into my fiction.
Of course it will.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the main thing, again, with this kind of writer's life, because we're always putting ideas into our heads, is just to kind of keep an eye out. I mean, the canal, if people ever read Map of Shadows, my dark fantasy novel, you'll read a whole chapter which I dictated while I was walking along the canal, which is like the walk I did yesterday, and there's a character who lives on a canal boat, and so I've made that part of my life. And in fact, that book is based in Bath. It's set in Bath where I live. So I tend to take everything in my life and use it, seed it into my fiction.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now, as your fiction has grown, it was not that long ago, I think it was almost 2 years ago, that you were close to shutting down the Creative Penn. But then instead you doubled down and you went for an even more aggressive schedule. So you went from thinking, I don't know if I want to keep doing this, to I'm going to give it my all. And you did that for the community in many ways. How did that happen?
Well, I think I was considering shutting down the podcast. I don't think I would have shut down the whole of the Creative Penn, but I think that was a bit, you know, why I'm so hyper scheduled now, why I also have a number of virtual assistants, is that I had reached that kind of burnout point. And I was doing kind of ad hoc podcasting, and the audience was not so, I mean, it was big, but I was like, I wasn't getting feedback. I wasn't really getting, it still felt like I've had a podcast since 2009, you know, we're doing it for all these years, and where was the reward in some way? So, but what I decided to do, I don't even know who it was. I think it was the Sell More Book Show with Brian and Jim, which is a great show. And I realized, well, I think it was this, that a weekly show at the same time becomes a habit. And I was kind of ad hoc. And if you become a habit, people will listen more because you're a habit. and you're like, and now I get emails or tweets that say, hey, it's Monday at like 7:30, like, where's the podcast? Stuff like that. So I did a couple of things. I changed the format. So I went to weekly, but I also have a segment where I say, tell me what you're doing while you're listening to the show. So I get feedback from the audience and I say, please let me know what you think, and I'll get tweets and I'll get emails. So I know the community cares. Around that time, obviously I moved to, I think it was a little before that, I moved to taking sponsorship. So your previous employer, Kobo, Writing Life, and now I have Ingram and Draft to Digital. And so I only will take sponsorship from companies I work with myself and approve of. I also started Patreon, which is, a kind of where individuals can sponsor. So some people are giving like $2 a month. And so that makes me feel like they want the show to continue as well. So it was and I outsourced. So I got a tech guy, I have a video guy, which is my husband, the video guy. I have a virtual assistant who does the transcript. So I also made it easier on me to do it with my time. So again, that's another secret, is if you are overwhelmed, what are the things that are not special to you? So the only special thing about my podcast is the bit where I'm talking, right? I mean, the rest of it is like any other podcast. You have to master files, you have to do transcripts, you have to do images. So all of that can be done by other people. The only bit I have to do is this bit, which is the bit that's enjoyable. So that's another tip. Schedule it and then balance up the time versus money equation, and consider outsourcing the things that will take you too much time. So in the writer space, if we outsource cover design generally, because unless we want to learn cover design and spend all that time upskilling, it's a difficult process. So outsourcing that, I have editors, proofreaders, all of that type of thing. I have now my VA help schedule my guest posts, all of that type of thing. Think about what you can outsource if you're at the point where you can't manage everything.
Fair enough. That works well. So you started podcasting in 2009.
Yeah.
What have you found has changed the most since you first launched the podcast?
In podcasting, or
in the community in general that you're podcasting about, the writing and publishing community?
Well, in 2009, it wasn't even really called podcasting. I mean, it kind of was, but it was before podcasting went big, which kind of happened, I think, 2014, 2015, podcasting really took off.
See, I thought it took off in 2006.
No, there were very few people back then. But so that's been a really interesting thing. The other thing that's really helped me is that when I started the Creative Penn in 2008, it was like me, Mark Coker from Smashwords, a couple of other people, Joel Friedlander, the book designer. There are a few people who've been around that long as bloggers, but it was still not trendy to be in the self-publishing, independent publishing space. So the reason the Creative Penn gets so much traffic, I think, is partly because it started so early and it's got so much content that over the years, it's just become an authority website based on what Google looks at. But that's because I started it before the gold rush. I started it before the Kindle. So this is what's so interesting. I mean, the change in 10 years, because we're recording this in 2018, so it's like 10 years this December. Ebooks, audiobooks, you and I talking about this, digital audio, print on demand, which did exist. I remember Book Surge before it became CreateSpace, before all the, back in the day, Lulu.
Before Amazon bought it.
Yes, exactly. And people used to use Lulu. And what I think what's so interesting, I wrote about this and talked about this in my show in November after we were in Oregon. What's so interesting right now is in 2008, we had to cobble everything together. People were selling downloadable PDFs. I mean, they still are, but there was not the ecosystem for the average consumer. So, but now we literally have every single thing we need to run a global business on the internet, to write, publish using professionals who work with traditional publishers. We can hire the best people. We can get our books to pretty much every country in the world through Kobo and Amazon and iBooks and Draft2 Digital and all these places. And, we can make money in different currencies, which is kind of brilliant in a world where global arbitrage is a good idea. In Britain, we can make money in Canadian dollars or US dollars or whatever. We have a global community of authors and independent publishers. The change is that in 2008, 2009, there was practically nothing. And now there's this huge ecosystem, and the number of authors making money online has just boomed. So, but I still think we're only at the beginning. That's what's so exciting, because it may have boomed in America, Canada, Britain, Australia, but there's still the rest of the world.
Which is a big place, apparently.
Apparently, it's really massive. So yeah, I'm super excited, and I think I did catch a glimpse of this back in 2008 when I learned about blogging from a guy called Yaro Starak, who's still blogging, making a living online. And I listened to an audio. This is why audio is so powerful, because I used to listen to audio on the way to work every day, to my miserable day job, because I needed to change my mindset about what was possible. And I remember Yaro saying, I'm making a 6-figure income from my laptop. And I remember his mum was dying, and sad, but he sat by her side for something like 3 months and worked while his mum went through that. And what's so amazing is that most people have to go to their day job every day, even if something happens like that in their family. Right. And I thought, I want that life, not obviously to be with my mum dying, because my mum is still going, but that kind of, I want to make my living from my laptop anywhere in the world, so I can write and travel and make money, make good money, doing something I love.
Oh, that's fantastic. So looking at, I mean, you've always had a very global view of publishing, like from the early days. I think, whenever I want to know about the future of what's going on, it's like, well, let's look at what Joanna's saying. But I have to flip that and say, what surprised you the most about what happened in publishing in 2017?
What surprised me? I don't know. I think it's really, I keep being surprised by how slow things are.
Because you're already 10 steps ahead of everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, yay, is it time for Magic Leap yet? Is it time for heads-up display? Or is it time for the blockchain? And it's like, no, it's not. It's really not. People are like, oh, audiobooks are the thing. It's like, sorry, didn't we say that several years ago? Can we not keep on moving on? And I think, as much as that maybe I'm in that early adopter curve, there's that curve, and the early, like me starting a podcast on self-publishing in 2009, it probably was 4 or 5 years too early. I got into translations too early and pulled out because there was no digital market in other languages, and then now there is. There are problems with being too early. But I think my surprise in 2017 really was, why are we still talking about some of these things, and also I think the realization that we have become a parallel industry. So there was a feeling before 2017, I think, still, that we wanted to speak at all the events with traditional publishers, we wanted to be at the book fairs, we wanted to try and prove ourselves in some way. But what's happened now, because we have all the tools that we need to reach customers directly, there's whole cohorts of authors who are just doing their thing and are not at all interested in what traditional publishers are doing, or they're working with traditional publishers as a business partner, as opposed to a sort of hireling, which is what some people are in that industry. So yeah, I think that's probably what was most surprising. I don't think much happened, to be fair, in 2017 in terms of a big shift. I think we're in this quieter period before the next big shift in 2018 or 19, which could see a massive shake-up in things like Barnes & Noble, whose latest report is pretty shocking. But again, all that means for independent authors is make sure your books are in print online, because all those shoppers will need to buy print. So I think it's weird, but print, it had a bit of a resurgence for independent authors in 2017, which is kind of cool.
Cool. So what areas of the industry are you now looking at that may take the concept of being a creator, being a storyteller to new levels?
Again, I mean, these are not necessarily for everybody, but I reflected on my consumption in 2017, and I said, I can either be ashamed of this or I can embrace it. And I realized that the things I was raving about were often TV shows on Netflix. So The Crown, for example, if people saw The Crown.
Just started it, yes.
Yes. I mean, from a storytelling perspective, the second season particularly, I was just stunned at what they were doing with symbolism, with story structure. Right. It's magnificent in terms of memoir to drama to character development and plot. Oh, there's so many layers. It's a masterful show, and I found some great books in 2017. The Power by Naomi Alderman was my standout, but what I was thinking about was Jonathan and I, my husband and I, will sit on a Saturday afternoon, evening, and watch something together. That is our shared experience. And the shows now that are coming out are amazing. There's so much amazing TV and film. So what I started to think was, well, if that's where the masterful storytelling is, where people can have a shared experience, then that's where I want to be. So I'm really looking at screenwriting again, in a serious way. And why this is a cultural shift too is towards the end of the year, Disney bought 21st Century Fox and Apple, I believe, Amazon have invested massively in Amazon Video, Netflix, obviously huge investment in content. So, and then there's all the normal networks. So what you've got is this huge demand for content in a way that people want to consume it. So I absolutely think the book is continuing, but what I want to do is take my intellectual property assets. So Map of Shadows is an ebook, print and print. It's not an audiobook yet, but it's an ebook and print. So if I turn it into a screenplay, there's the possibility it could be, it could reach more people. The story, the world, the ideas could reach people in a different way. And even if it doesn't, what I'm learning about story craft through screenwriting is invaluable. It's so concise and brilliant that I'm really enjoying that. So that's one big thing. I think that's, for me, that's a big shift in 2018, I think. And then if you take it even further into kind of more futurist stuff, if you look at, like I mentioned, Magic Leap, which could be the heads-up display technology that will take us off the handheld device. We will be moving to that. Who knows when? Maybe 5 years, whatever. People, I've even seen, with self-driving cars, one of the discussions now is who will own the content that is delivered to people in self-driving cars. That's huge. So Toyota might start their own entertainment channels. Right. So this is the thing. There's so much opportunity in other mediums. And we've always got to remember that the ebook, the book, the audiobook, whatever, is just a container for the information or the inspiration or the entertainment that we've created within that. So why don't we think about multiple ways of kind of using that asset? And that's very exciting to me. But if people listening are at the beginning of their journey, again, this might be slightly advanced for now. But, again, whenever, the one thing you could take it back to is when you're watching a show, have a think about why. For example, we watched a couple of shows last weekend. And we watched a thriller with big names in, like John Malkovich, and it was called Unlocked. And it was terrible. And what was great about it being terrible was we talked about why was it so terrible. And the things that they missed, opening questions, character development. And then we watched, it was literally, I was like, Jonathan said, that's your choice, now it's my choice. And we watched this weightlifting documentary. But it was so exciting. I can't remember what it was called, but we were so engaged because they opened, the shot was the trophy and the open question was who's going to win. And then they did all these characters. And I was just, what you can learn about story from watching other things is very exciting.
Cool. So I think it's safe to say that you are an optimist when it comes to opportunities for writers.
Oh yeah, I can't see any downsides right now. Can you?
They're hard to find.
Look at your Prime Minister, for goodness sake.
I know.
You have the most popular Prime Minister in the world.
Very popular with romance authors in particular who want to use them on the covers. So this is fantastic. I know you and I, as we often have, can chat for hours, but I have to be conscious of your time, and I know you have an appointment coming up. So let's close out by sharing where people can find you and how they can connect with you online.
Yeah, sure. So my website is thecreativepenn.com, pen with a double N, and you'll find the free author blueprint there, which is a sort of ebook and video series and cheat sheets on writing a novel and all kinds of other things, book marketing. And then I have the Creative Penn Podcast, if you like a weekly show full of more of this. And then I'm on Twitter at the Creative Penn.
Great. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today, Jo.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
One of the reasons why I've been listening to Joanna Penn's The Creative Penn Podcast isn't just for information and inspiration about writing and marketing your book, which is her tagline. I listen because Joanna has a refreshingly optimistic viewpoint about writing and publishing. And every time I chat with her, every time I see her speaking on stage in person, and every time I listen to an episode of her podcast, even if she's interviewing someone that I think may not be interesting for my own needs, I come away feeling refreshed, inspired, and even more optimistic myself. I mentioned that I would be reading the book Joanna and Dr. Euan Lawson have written, The Healthy Writer, and I have actually started reading it. I'm quite enjoying it and thought I would share a very small section of that book from an early chapter in the book that I've already read. This chapter is entitled 7 Reasons Why Writing is Great for Your Health. And here is reason number 4. Writing can make you more optimistic. People who are more grateful have a positive, optimistic approach to life. They appreciate what they have in terms of possessions, and also importantly, their social relationships. How do you become more grateful? Writing has an answer, and the results are based in solid neuropsychological evidence. University of California psychologists Emmon and McCullough ran an experiment in 2003. Participants wrote down 5 things for which they were grateful: the kindness of a friend, a beautiful view, or just a sunset. They only had to write a sentence, and they only had to do it once a week. The results were startling, with clear improvements in well-being, even for people with serious medical problems. Using a gratitude journal can reduce your anxiety. It can help you move away from negative thoughts, especially when we live in a time of constant media negativity. There is an important connection between your thoughts and your emotions. Writing can make you more optimistic, and people who are more optimistic are happier. Now that's that section from the book, which I find such a great book so far, quite enjoying. But speaking of optimism, my partner Liz and I are in the process of training for a half marathon in Waterloo, Ontario for the end of April 2018. Liz has run a full marathon already, but the most I have ever run is about 16 kilometers. Now a half marathon is about 21 kilometers. We started our training schedule for the marathon this month, January, and I'm in the midst of the numerous weekday 5K runs that are dictated in the training schedule. So right after recording this, I'll be heading downstairs to hit the treadmill for about 45 minutes, which is usually that 5K run for about 30 to 35 minutes, and then a 10-minute walking/cooling down. Now, one of the reasons I mention this non-writing goal is because it ties in nicely with the book, The Healthy Writer, and the methodology and thoughts behind it. I sit a lot. You have to do that when you're writing. I find it invigorating to do something different in order to get my blood flowing and to ensure that I'm trying to keep or return my body to decent shape. And so having a physical goal to work on while working on mental or emotional goals, however you see writing goals, perhaps they're even financial goals, but this helps me with that balance and the conjoined go forward momentum. The fact that I'm doing it collaboratively with Liz means that we're keeping each other challenged. I have a partner that I can compare with in terms of, I did my 5K, are you going to do your 5K? Very similar to what writers do when they participate in NaNoWriMo or National Novel Writing Month. They're using each other as leverage to motivate each other to keep going forward. So in any case, after listening to my chat with Joanna while I'm on the treadmill this afternoon, I've decided to re-listen to one of her own backlist Creative Penn episodes, where she talks about what she learned as a writer after training for and completing a 100-kilometer ultra walking marathon called the Race to the Stones. Now, I took a clip of that from her podcast and put it into episode 74 of the Kobo Writing Life podcast, which is a podcast I used to host. Now, I titled that Walking the Writer's Life with Joanna Penn, and I'm sure that when I start to get tired on the treadmill and I want to quit, which usually happens before I even hit the 2-kilometer mark, I know I'll be inspired and perhaps more optimistic while listening to Joanna share her 100-kilometer walk and paralleling that back to walking the writer's life. I'll let you know how that goes. Thank you for listening to episode 2 of Stark Reflections. Looking forward to catching you again in episode 3 next week.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomtech.com.